Good morning, everybody. Like to welcome you to another edition of StoneTalk. Those who weren't able to join us last month, my name is Jason Osgood. I am the Senior Director of Distribution for StoneHardscapes. And this is a monthly webinar series where we're going to try to cover everything about natural stone, about the installation of stone, about the processes of stone, about how to care for your stone. So we at StoneHardscapes are happy that you're able to join us today. And with that, let's get rolling. All right. So today's episode is Best Principles for Natural Stone Installation Part 2, Advanced Techniques and Procedures. We're going to talk a little more in depth about some of the more technical things that go on with stone installation. We covered the basics last month, and so this month we're going to get into it. We're going to answer some questions that we got and hopefully give you a little more understanding of what it takes to install these beautiful stones. So as we talked about last month, installing natural stone is really a 7-step process: site prep, excavation, basin sand install, your paver install itself, the border, the edge restraints, and cleaning. But we're going to get a little more in depth in some of these processes because they hold great importance to the longevity of your deck. And we had some questions afterwards, so I'm hoping to be able to answer that. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the basin sand. We'll talk about install techniques. We'll talk about the proper compaction, what could go wrong without proper compaction, and what you're going to see. And then we'll get into a little deeper into the paver install on the proper cutting techniques and the tools that are needed to cut these pavers properly. So as I showed last month, step 3 of this is the base and the bedding sand install. The base material itself is a crushed aggregate. It lays down below your bedding sand, below your pavers. It gives your pavers a very solid foundation to lay on. The most important aspect of this, whether it's crushed aggregate or it's road base or it's crusher run, is to make sure that the product will compact to a relatively solid form. Now, keep in mind that this material, properly compacted, will compact to about 75 to 80% of its original pre-compaction thickness. So if you just do some basic math on that, if you lay down 4 inches, it'll compact to roughly 3 inches thick. And you really should not lay base material any more than 3 to 4 inches at a time. If you go beyond that, you're running the risk of not getting proper compaction all the way through the material and the base itself failing. So I had some questions last month, after last month's, asking a little bit as to how you calculate the material. So if you just look at this diagram itself, you can see that you've got a pool shell, a coping stone, and what you're going to do is you're going to run a string line off the top of your coping stone, because your coping is now laid at the elevation you're looking for. You're going to run your string line out beyond the deck itself, running it calculated with the pitch that you desire. And remember, natural stone is roughly 1/8 of an inch per foot. So as you run your string line out, you're going to measure down from that, and you should come up with the proper amounts that you're going to put as your base and your bedding sand. So if you look at this scenario itself, and remembering that about 75 to 80% of the base material are your original pre-compaction grade. So in this scenario itself, you're going to have roughly 8 inches of excavation below the string line, 6 inches of crushed base, 1 inch of bedding sand, and 1.25 inches paver. Now, I know basic math shows that that's going to be about 1/4 of an inch over, and that's okay, because if you're 1/4 of an inch to 1/16 of an inch thicker or higher on your excavation, you're going to get some natural compaction over time that'll let those pavers settle the way they need to settle. And as we showed, like we showed last month, this is crushed base. So let's get into the proper techniques on installing your crushed base. Deliver it to the job site, deliver it to the deck. Very simple. Get it there the best way you can, whether it's with a bobcat or a wheelbarrow. If you've got great access, a bobcat works really well. If you don't, then a wheelbarrow. But once you get it onto your deck area, you're going to want to spread the base material out as evenly as possible. Take care to stay as close to your elevation and your pitch as possible. Keep in mind that this material will compact differently in different spots. You might have a little heavier aggregate in some spot and a little lighter aggregate in other spots. So you're going to get some different compactions, but also keep in mind, you don't want to go more than 4 inches thick. If you have to go more than 4 inches thick, just break it up into 2 steps. You've got to go more than that, break it up into 3 steps. But you're going to want to screen the material out, get it out as best as you can. Take care to stay as close as you can to your elevation and your pitch. And then once you do that, you're going to run a plate compactor over it. Now, there's several different compaction techniques. You can use a plate compactor, which is what you see here. You can use a hand tamper, or you can use what's called a jumping jack. I fully recommend you use a plate compactor. With a hand compactor, you're not going to get the desired compaction. You're not going to be able to hit it with much force. And a jumping jack is really used for small areas to be very precise on the compaction. A plate compactor is going to work very, very well. First thing you're going to do is you're going to wet the area down. You're going to start on the outside edges, and you're going to run that compactor encircling the area first twice. Once you do that, you either work in a back and forth motion from side to side, or you can continue to encircle the entire area, making sure that you've covered the entire deck. Once your first pass is done, depending on the time of the day, how hot it is, how heavy the sun is that day, you might want to wet the material down slightly again, but you're going to want to make a second pass with your plate compactor, making sure that you run this in a perpendicular fashion. You want to make sure you crisscross your pattern. This helps ensure a complete coverage and complete compaction of your deck. And there's a reason why we're so adamant about making sure that your compaction and your base material is done properly. We'll get to that in a second, but this gives you a little diagram of what we're talking about. Run around the outside and then just zigzag back and forth, just making sure that you cover 100% of that deck. Now, when I talked a minute ago about the types of tools you're going to want to use, this is really the perfect case scenario. The perfect tool to use for this project are plate compactors. And a plate compactor really kind of comes in 2 different forms, a reversible or a non-reversible. And what makes the difference in the two is the fact that the vibration on a reversible is a little more towards the middle, and the handle itself flips from one side to the other. So you're looking at the screen here, the compactor on your left-hand side is a reversible. So I can run that plate compactor straight over to one side of the deck, flip the handle, and just run it back the other way. A non-reversible, the vibration center is a little more towards the front, and it pulls that compactor forward. You're not going to be able to reverse this. It's going to fight against you. This one is very good if you've got a big open area and you can make circles and you can turn it. Now, you really want to use a compactor that is either a standard or a light duty line. They make these compactors for heavy commercial use. That's not necessary. What you're looking for in a plate compactor for a swimming pool deck or a residential deck is something that's going to have a pound per foot of between 2,000 and 3,500. That's what it's going to hit. That's how it's going to compact. Somewhere in that range is great. Your vibrations are going to be somewhere between 4,500 and 5,500 vibrations per minute. Now, there's a reason, again, why we harp on making sure your base is done well. You don't install your base properly if you don't make sure that it's compacted well, if you don't make sure that it's pitched the way it needs to pitch to run the waterway, you're going to have issues. One of the issues that you'll come up with is the deck itself, the base will collapse and the pavers will sink over time. It's unsightly. It's difficult to fix. If you do it right the first time, you don't have these issues. But you can see in this picture, this crew did not compact the material very well around the pool shell. And because the paver deck is not a solid concrete deck, the water will wash down in between the pavers themselves. Proper compaction, you're fine. Proper pitch, you're fine. If you don't have that, the pavers, the base material itself will compact over time. Your pavers will dip and it'll be unsightly. The other big issue you're going to have, if you don't do your base correctly, you don't set your pitch properly, is you're going to have an area where water is going to stand, specifically in wet areas like the South and Florida, where it rains constantly. You're going to have a situation where the water is not going to be able to run away from the deck itself. And as you can see here in this picture, here, right in this spot, is a low area on this deck. This is a very wet area. The water runs into this spot, drains down in between the pavers, and just sits there over time because without the proper pitch on the base, the water has nowhere to run. The water has nowhere to go, and it just gets saturated and just sits there. Mold will grow. Keep this in mind. We don't mine this material with mold already in it. The mold and the mildew that grows on the deck is because the area stays moist, because the base stays wet. 99 out of 100 times, if an issue happens where there's mold and mildew on the paver, you pull the paver up, I promise you that base material, that bedding sand, is soaked because there's nowhere for that water to go. So this is why we really stress, take your time, do the base correctly. When you do the base and the bedding sand correctly, when you compact it right and you hit your elevation and your pitch properly, you should not have any problems. Now, when you've done your base properly, this is what it should look like. This deck itself is crowned. As you can see, it rolls off all three sides that you can see, and it's compacted very well. Now, what you're looking at here is a deck that is ready for the bedding material, for the bedding sand. We do not recommend that you lay your pavers directly on the base itself. As you can see in this picture, there are still some large aggregate stones that are sitting on top. You can lay your pavers down, but you will not get a solid locking of those pavers, and the pavers themselves will rock. That's what the bedding sand is for. So let's move on to the bedding sand. Remember again, we talked last month, bedding sand is a coarse aggregate or an angular sand. It cannot be rounded, it cannot be play sand, or for our industry, it cannot be filter sand. It has to be angular, it has to be coarse, and please make sure that it's a wash sand. That angularity of the sand, when you lay it down and you screed it out, will help its compaction. It'll help lock that sand in. If you use a rounded or a play sand here, when you put those pavers down over time, that sand will bleed out from underneath that paver, and those pavers will sink. So again, here's a picture of the angular sand and the coarse aggregate sand that you need for proper installation. Now, once you put the sand in the deck, you dump it in, you need to screed it out. There's really three ways you can do this. First way is, and you can see this gentleman here has a string line. I'll highlight it here on the right side that runs all the way out. What he's done is he's laid this string line to the level of the top of his paver. And he's got one on the left-hand side as well. And what he'll do is he'll pull this board along the string line to get him the proper level that he needs for his sand. It's a really nice, easy way to do this. Now, there is some disadvantages to using a string line. String line gets in the way a lot. It's very flimsy at times, so you don't have a hard edge to pull against, and you can easily make a mistake with the string line, but it's a quick, easy way to do this. Another way is using a notch board. These gentlemen here have set the sailor and the soldier course, so the outside edges are already set. So they already have their pitch and their elevation done. All they need to do is get the bedding sand. So what they have done is they have taken a long piece of lumber and they have notched it to the thickness of the paver itself. And then they'll run that board along the outside edges to screed that sand out the way they need to. Please keep in mind that with a piece of lumber, if you're going to use a piece of lumber, make sure that it is completely straight, and you can really only use it for a short period of time, because over time the lumber in the elements will start to warp and bend. It really needs to be a very, very straight piece of lumber. Now, this application, doing it this way, is a great, easy way to do it, but you're very limited on what you can do and the size you can do. As you can see, this patio isn't as wide as most patios, so they can use a notch board to do this. The third way is running straight pipe inside the deck itself. So you're going to lay the straight pipe, and what you have here is 3 pieces of galvanized steel with a 1-inch outside diameter, and they lay that galvanized steel pipe right down on top of the base material. I will only recommend the galvanized steel pipe. You do not want to use a piece of PVC here, because like I said earlier, your base material is not going to be perfect. That's what the bedding sand's doing for you. And if you lay that piece of PVC down, it's going to run, because it's flexible, it's going to run along the dips and valleys of the base itself. So a piece of galvanized steel will stay straight. What you do here is you lay the pieces down, and that gives you a very solid foundation to run your screed board over. You can be very precise with this. It's very quick. It's very easy. Now, the only disadvantage to this is as they're laying these pavers down, as you can see by the bucket that I'm highlighting now and this margin trowel, these pieces of galvanized steel need to be pulled out as they're laying their pavers down, and then the gaps need to be filled. So as you're doing this, you're adding an extra step to your installation, but it gives you the most accurate and the cleanest installation of your bedding sand. And when you're done, your bedding sand should look something similar to this. Very straight, very clean, hits the elevation and the pitch that is desired and needed for this deck. Once this is done, once your bedding sand's in, it's time to lay the pavers. We talked last month about a quick overview about installing the pavers themselves, making sure that once you install your pavers, once you start, use the pavers as a landing area or a working area. Lay the first courses down and then utilize that solid deck as you lay the rest of the pavers down. What you don't want to do is walk through the sand and try to lay it that way. This is by far the easiest way. Work smarter, guys. Don't work harder. This is an example here of a crew that decided that they were going to walk over the sand the entire time as they're laying this deck down. And with each individual piece, they have to make sure that it is level. They have to work on every individual piece itself. Doing it this way adds about 4 times the time it takes to install this deck with them walking on this sand than it would if they did it properly the first time. So again, work smarter, don't work harder. Now, once the sand's down, you start laying the pavers. Let's get into the paver install itself, and let's talk a little bit about cutting pavers. There's really 2 tools itself that we recommend to cut pavers. One of them is a tile wet saw. Tile saw has its advantages and its disadvantages. Its advantages are it's clean. It gives you by far the most accurate and cleanest cuts. and it's electric. So you don't have to worry about gas and oil and really much maintenance on it. There are some disadvantages to a tile wet saw. Regardless of most of them having splash guards, water is going to spray everywhere. So you need to pay attention to where you're using it. It's limited in size, in the size of paver that can be cut on it. The deck itself is only so big. So some of the larger format natural stones might not fit on a tile wet saw. And you really can only do straight cuts only on it. The second tool, and by far the most popular tool in the hardscapes industry, is a gas-powered cutoff saw. Now, the gas-powered cutoff saw has some tremendous advantages to it. It's quick, it's easy. You take the saw itself to the cut. Obviously, it's great for freeform because you can move it around. It can be used either wet or dry, and it can be used in walking cuts. And what I mean by walking cuts are if you have long cuts to make and you install your pavers, you can install your pavers outside the finished edge of the deck, chalk line where your cut needs to be, and a gas-powered cutoff saw is very good about just plunging the saw itself into the stone and walking that cut. So you can walk that entire cut regardless of how long it is. Now, it also has some tremendous disadvantages. It's messy. The cuts are sloppy. The tool itself is very heavy and cumbersome, specifically when it's running and the centrifugal force of the blade. If you're not prepared for it, it will wear you out, and it's loud. But as you can see, and as I said, it is by far the most popular cutting tool in our industry. And I talked earlier about you can use them wet or you can use it dry. And there's an attachment that goes on these saws that a hose will hook up to, which will squirt water onto the blade. Now, there's advantages to having it wet. It's clean. It cuts down on the dust drastically, and it cuts down on the wear of the blade itself. It cools the blade down so it doesn't wear the blade out. Disadvantages are it's cumbersome. You're pulling that hose around everywhere you are, so you're limited as to where you can cut. And because you're limited, typically you'll cut in the same spot. With that water running, you're going to create a mess. Now, the advantage to using that saw dry is it's portable. It can go anywhere. Again, great walking cuts, but there are some huge disadvantages to using that saw dry. Much greater blade wear, much greater tool wear, and silica. And I've highlighted that. Silica, 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 right? So when that silica gets up in the air and that air filter and that carburetor suck that silica in, it's going to damage that saw. And I'm going to put two pictures up here to kind of highlight what I'm talking about when it comes to silica. As you can see, these gentlemen are cutting these pavers, these natural stones, on the deck. They have a tool that, as you can see here, they can hook a hose up to and go wet, but they're not. Look how dusty the tile is. Look how dusty the pavers are in the back. Same job, and you can see even closer how dusty these pavers are. This was actually a remodel job, so they had a screen enclosure. For those of you who aren't aware, here in Florida, we cover just about every pool and screen, so they have a screen enclosure here. That silica gets everywhere. So you can imagine the amount of time you're going to take now to have to go back and clean the screen down several times, clean the plants and any sort of furniture that's on that back patio. If there's no screen enclosure on it, your foliage around the area itself is going to get covered in that silica. Now, silica this dust has become a very big issue in our industry itself. And I want to show this real quick. This is the hazardous silica versus OSHA. OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, has a code. It's 1926.1153D1. It's the permissible exposure limit, or the PEL. And what that says is that an employee, in simple terms, it says how much a dust a worker is legally allowed to breathe over an 8-hour period. The PEL is determined with 3 factors: air, dust, and time. It's 50 micrograms of dust per cubic meter of air per 8 hours. It really depends on where you're at, what state you're in, how stringent OSHA is. On commercial jobs, this is heavily enforced on commercial jobs, not as much on residential jobs. However, I will tell you that I have seen instances and I have heard of instances where they have gone after residential jobs. So just keep this in mind, understand where this is going. The fines for this are very, very heavy. I have heard in the past that, they can be upwards of $7,500 the first one, $25,000 the second one, and on and on. Now, because of this, there's been some development in our industry in some tools that are available. These are 2 table saws, basically, for the hardscapes industry that suck the dust in during the cutting process, does not blow the dust out. These are OSHA approved. I've actually used these tools inside a commercial building cutting natural stone because they're approved by OSHA. So just to give you an idea of kind of where the industry is headed. And the last thing is, I want to talk a little bit about blades themselves. We recommend diamond blades by far. And there's really 2 ways I define the diamond blades for our industry: segmental rim blades and continuous rim blades. On the left here, you see a segmental blade for natural stone, for porcelain tile. The segments for natural stone for a segmental rim blade, and when I mean segments, I mean, as you can see, the rim itself is broken into multiple segments. The segments should be no more than 1/8 of an inch apart. That blade on the right is great for masonry products, for concrete pavers or CMU blocks, but it's going to chop it. It's not meant for a harder stone. It's meant for a nice, soft cement product. The blade on your left here with an 8-inch segment works very, very well. It's primarily used for cutoff saws. The segments allow the blade to stay a little cooler and allow for a little bit of chopping while it cuts. The other blade is what we call a continuous rim. There are no segments in the blade. There's 2 different types of those. There are slotted continuous rim, which you see on your left, typically used for dry saws, and there are flatter continuous rim for harder stone, and it must be used for a wet saw. The difference really between these are they will all cut the stone, but it's the difference between taking a serrated knife and cutting a piece of paper or taking a razor blade and cutting a piece of paper. If you have a product like a beautiful product like a marble or a granite that is incredibly dense, you're going to want to use a continuous rim because it's going to stay in contact and it's going to cut that stone very, very well. If you have a lesser dense stone, you can use a segmental blade and it'll cut it very, very well. But because of how dense some of the harder products are, you really want to stick with this type of blade, a continuous rim. So I really wanted to take this time and get into some more specifics, hope I've answered some questions for this. As always, we're available to answer questions. We're available to come out and teach. We're available to really help you understand the install process of this better. There's much more that we could talk about, and we could take all day and go through this. The really best practice is to be on a job site. The best practice is to do this process yourself. So with that being said, I'm done for today. Thank you all. Please join me next month when we talk about coping installation. So we'll do the best practices for natural stone coping. Also, please join us every Wednesday after my presentation for our designer series with our senior design architect Linda Abbott. She really does a great job of kind of going through all the design aspects of the product that we have. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, my name is Jason Osgood, and I really appreciate everybody's time today. Have a great afternoon and be well.